Now I want to take you to New Mexico, where officials are offering new details on the death of actor Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa. Both were found dead inside their New Mexico home in February. Let's take a listen.
The preliminary pacemaker interrogation results were released last week, and I'll let Dr. Jarrell touch more specifically on those results. The gas company New Mexico, they also did an analysis of the residence, and they found one minor leak in a single burner on the kitchen stove, which was 0.33% of room air, which was pretty minute and insignificant. Since that time, Xena, the deceased dog, has been taken for necropsy at the Veterinary Diagnostic Services, and we'll be awaiting those results. Let's speak a little bit in reference to the timeline for Betsy Arakawa. We know from our investigation that on February 9th, 2025, she picked up Xena from Gruta Veterinary Hospital. There was a procedure that was done with the dog, which may explain why the dog was in a crate at the residence. Let's move on to February 11th, 2025. Mrs. Arakawa had an email conversation with her massage therapist at about 11:21 a.m. Moving on into the afternoon, Ms. Arakawa was at the Sprouts Farmers Market between 3:30 and 4:15 p.m. Ms. Arakawa was seen on surveillance video at the CVS Pharmacy in Santa Fe from 4:12 to 4:20 p.m. She then stopped at a local pet food store at about 4:54 p.m. Her car was seen on surveillance, and the remote control clicker that is assigned to her and her vehicle was used to enter the subdivision to gain access to the gated community at 5:15 p.m. Numerous emails were unopened on her computer on February 11th. There was no additional outgoing communication from her or known activity after February 11th, 2025. The cell phone information and the cell phone data is pending. We're working with state police to get the information from those phones, but our investigation shows that all the last known communication and activity from Ms. Arakawa was on February 11th. I'm going to go ahead and turn over the podium to Dr. Gerald. I would ask that everybody refrain from asking questions until everybody has provided their statements. I'll step up to the podium, and then we'll go ahead and field questions from the media. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. I'm Dr. Heather Gerald, the Chief Medical Examiner for New Mexico at the Office of the Medical Investigator. I'd like to begin by stating that it is unprecedented for the Office of the Medical Investigator to make public statements about death investigations. However, the circumstances surrounding these two deaths require accurate dissemination of important information. I've also spoken with the Hackman family prior to this conference, who are aware of the autopsy findings and conclusions and are aware of this conference. On Thursday, February 27th, I performed an autopsy on Mr. Gene Hackman. Medical examiner Dr. Daniel Gallego at the Office of the Medical Investigator performed a full autopsy on Miss Betsy Arakawa Hackman, also on Thursday, February 27th. By report, Miss Arakawa Hackman's legal name is Betsy Hackman, which is how she will be referred to hereafter. The cause of death for Miss Betsy Hackman, aged 65 years, is Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. The manner of death is natural. Autopsy examination and full-body postmortem CT demonstrated no findings of trauma internally or externally, with microscopic findings consistent with hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. Laboratory testing was positive for hantavirus at a clinical lab, with required confirmation testing positive at Scientific Laboratories Division. Testing for COVID-19, influenza, and other common respiratory viruses was negative. Testing for carbon monoxide was negative. There were no other significant natural disease findings. Pills present on scene were thyroid medication, which were being taken as prescribed and is not currently a concern for a contributory cause of death. The cause of death for Mr. Gene Hackman, aged 95 years, is hypertensive and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, with Alzheimer's disease as a significant contributory factor. Autopsy examination and a full-body postmortem CT examination demonstrated no acute findings of internal or external trauma and showed severe heart disease, including multiple surgical procedures involving the heart, evidence of prior heart attacks, and severe changes of the kidneys due to chronic high blood pressure. Examination of the brain showed advanced Alzheimer's disease, as well as blood vessel changes in the brain secondary to chronic high blood pressure. Laboratory testing performed at Scientific Laboratories Division was negative for COVID-19, influenza, and other common respiratory viruses. Testing for hantavirus was negative. Testing for carbon monoxide was negative. Additionally, there were no autopsy findings concerning for hantavirus infection. I have been asked when death occurred for these individuals. There is no reliable scientific method to accurately determine the exact time or date of death. Mr. Hackman's initial pacemaker data revealed cardiac activity on February 17th, with subsequent pacemaker interrogation demonstrating an abnormal rhythm of atrial fibrillation on February 18th, which was the last record of heart activity. Based on this information, it is reasonable to conclude that Mr. Hackman probably died around February 18th. Based on the circumstances, it is reasonable to conclude that Ms. Hackman passed away first, with February 11th being the last time that she was known to be alive. Lastly, clinically, hantavirus infection is characterized by flu-like symptoms consisting of fever, muscle aches, cough, sometimes vomiting and diarrhea that can progress to shortness of breath and cardiac or heart failure and lung failure. This occurs after a 1 to 8 week exposure to excrement from a primarily particular mouse species that carries hantavirus. The mortality of hantavirus, the mortality rate of the hantavirus strain in the Southwest is about 38 to 50%. The hantavirus strains in the United States are not transmissible from person to person. And so this is an appropriate time to segue to Dr. Aaron Phipps, the State Public Health Veterinarian with the New Mexico Department of Health. But before I do so, I'd like to kindly ask for everyone to please respect the privacy that Mr. Gene Hackman, Miss Betsy Hackman, and their family and friends deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gerald. I will now provide additional information about hantaviruses in New Mexico. There are many different types of hantaviruses found worldwide. These viruses are zoonotic, meaning they are transmitted from animals to humans. Hantaviruses are carried by rodents. The hantavirus found in New Mexico, the Sin Nombre virus, is found throughout the state, primarily in deer mice, but in other rodents as well. Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome is a rare disease caused by hantaviruses, but a small number of human infections are found every year in New Mexico. Over the past 5 years, New Mexico has confirmed between 1 and 7 hantavirus infections in humans each year. Through the end of 2024, we have identified 136 infections over the past 50 years in New Mexico residents, 5 of these in Santa Fe County. This is a serious disease. 42% of these infections here in New Mexico were fatal. Most transmission occurs around the patient's residence or workplace, and the New Mexico Department of Health typically conducts an environmental investigation at the residence of all hantavirus cases in our jurisdiction. This can help identify specific areas that may pose higher risk, providing insight into where transmission may have occurred and how to prevent future infections. On March 5th, the New Mexico Department of Health staff conducted a risk assessment of the property, including the main residence as well as other structures on the property. This was critically important to address concerns about health risks to first responders, as well as to inform any prevention measures needed to protect the family and other individuals entering the property in the future. We assessed the risk of exposure in the primary residence as low, similar to other well-maintained houses in New Mexico. We did identify signs of rodent entry in other structures on the property and provided information and resources about reducing the risk of hantavirus transmission related to those areas. Hantavirus can be transmitted to people through rodent urine, droppings, or saliva, so it is important to take special steps when cleaning up after rodents. Avoiding contact with or breathing in aerosolized rodent urine or feces, especially in a poorly ventilated area, is key. Detailed guidance can be found on the New Mexico Department of Health and the CDC websites, but I will provide a very brief summary now. It is important to use gloves and a well-fitting N95 mask when around or cleaning rodent-infested areas, and to open any windows or doors for at least 30 minutes beforehand to increase ventilation. Spray the area thoroughly with a 10% bleach solution or a commercial disinfectant. Let it sit for 5 minutes. Next, clean the area with paper towels, then throw them away in a covered garbage can that is regularly emptied. Before removing gloves, wash your gloved hands with soap and water or with a disinfectant, and then after removing gloves, wash your hands again with soap and water. It's important to never sweep up or vacuum mouse droppings, since this can spread particles up into the air. Since hantavirus is found throughout New Mexico, awareness of these risks and how to reduce them is important for all New Mexicans. The New Mexico Department of Health extends our deepest condolences to the families and friends during this difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that'll conclude the statements for today. We will go ahead and take questions. I ask that there be one question per agency, and please state who you're directing the question to, as there's several individuals here at this conference. Sir.
Sheriff, just to clarify the timeline here, does this mean Gene Hackman was likely home with his deceased wife for a week before he passed away himself?
Yes, I would assume that is the case.
Do you believe, given his Alzheimer's status, that Mr. Hackman was able to live on his own and survive for those 7 days?
I think that's more a question, maybe for Dr. Jarrell.
Just to repeat so that everyone could hear, the question was, do we believe that Mr. Hackman was able to live on his own and survive? The answer to that question is that Mr. Hackman showed evidence of advanced Alzheimer's disease. I'm not aware of what his normal daily functioning capability was. He was in a very poor state of health. He had significant heart disease, and I think ultimately that is what resulted in his death. I was able to look at fluid to determine if he was dehydrated, and I did not see evidence of dehydration. I did see evidence of very poor kidney function, and I think he died as a result of his heart disease and with Alzheimer's being that contributing factor.
What about starvation?
The question was, what about starvation? So there was no food in his stomach, which means he had not eaten recently, but he had also no evidence of dehydration.
So based on your understanding of the progression of the Alzheimer's, do you believe that he was possibly not aware that his wife had died or didn't know what to do in that situation?
It's difficult to answer. The question was he aware that Miss Hackman had died? And I think that question's difficult to answer, but I can tell you that he was in an advanced state of Alzheimer's, and it's quite possible that he was not aware that she was deceased.
This is for the sheriff. Considering the circumstances under which Mr. Hackman was found in the mudroom with his walking cane and sunglasses by him, do you think there is a possibility that he was trying to get help for his wife?
That's hard to answer. Again, it's hard to get into the frame of mind of what was happening at the time. And I don't know if we'll ever have the answer to that question, whether he was going to go for help or was it. Sir?
Sure. Are there any other big questions that you're trying to answer? I mean, does this answer the biggest questions you've had about their death in this case? Is there anything else that you're really seeking?
Yeah, so the question is there any other big questions that are left? I think a lot of questions were answered here today. I think there was, Dr. Durrell went over the cause of death, and I think a lot of those questions are answered. I think the timeline that we've been given as far as the pacemaker results and the history and evidence that we found as far as the timeline of Miss Arakawa, I think a lot of the questions have been answered. We are waiting on the cell phones, but I would very unlikely that the cell phones are going to show anything else. Another question?
Sheriff, are there any signs of, what have you learned about Mr. Hackman's communication after February 11th? Did you talk to any friends of his who had spoken with him during that week-long period, or know anything about what he was doing?
So the question is whether there was any communication from Mr. Hackman or activity, and no, at this point, no. I don't know if he used cell phones or technology or emails. There's no indication of that. So right now there is no activity from Mr. Hackman.
Sheriff, do you know if his pacemaker was connected to some sort of monitoring system? If anyone tipped off that something was wrong?
The question was his pacemaker connected to a monitoring service?
All right, you are listening to a live press conference from Santa Fe, New Mexico, on the death of actor Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa. We're getting a lot of details from authorities who have done essentially a TikTok of the final days of the couple. We learned that Betsy Arakawa was last known that she was alive on February 11th. The police officer there detailing her trips throughout the day, saying that she was spotted on cameras going to CVS, then stopped by a pet store, also seen returning back to their gated community. And then from there on, there were no emails or known communication from her after February 11th. Cell phone data there is pending. They believe that it's on the 11th that she passed from this a virus associated with mice. Also hearing that Hackman, actor Gene Hackman, he had severe Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease. They believe that he died somewhere between February 17th and the 18th. Also, that he was found with no food in his stomach, but also not dehydrated, in that because of his state with Alzheimer's, it's possible that he did not know of his wife's passing. For more on this, I want to bring in former San Bernardino Police Chief Jared Bergwan. Chief Bergwan, you're listening to this presser and heard all these details. And I'm curious, what stuck out to you?
Well, first of all, I really applaud the sheriff and the officials there. I think they gave great detail and they really started to maybe close the distance between what was suspected and what they actually have. As an investigator, I think I said this when we first started covering this last week. As an investigator, you go where the evidence goes, and I know that we all suspected, or the most likely scenario was carbon monoxide when this happened. What are the chances of both adults and a dog in one incident dying around the same time? But this was another possibility, and again, they started to diminish the possibility of carbon monoxide. They moved to other areas, and they followed the evidence. Um, the fact that her last communication was on the 11th, I don't know that that means that she died on the 11th. As we all know, I mean, we've all probably been in bed with the flu before, and responding to emails or getting on your phone was not at the top of your priority list when you're not feeling well. So it could have been in the days following that. However, we also know that folks with Alzheimer's disease that are struggling to kind of understand what's going on around them, that brings about a great deal of confusion. So those types of details help bring the entire thing into focus where, although it seemed unlikely when this first happened, you can kind of start to understand how this played out.
Yeah. Well, and we learned about Hantavirus, which I think was something new for a lot of listeners today, or the sin nombre virus in that particular region. It's carried through deer mice, is what we're told. It has a mortality rate of around 42%, is what one of the experts there was saying. But Chief, I have a question, because still outstanding right now, we have these phone records that authorities are trying to get access to. What would you look for with those? I mean, what could those possibly tell you as investigators are looking to close up this case?
Well, phone records should give you greater detail in terms of last contact. If she did try to call a doctor, call somebody and say, "Hey, I'm not feeling well," some of those things may come about as a result of the phone records. It's unlikely she left the house after the 11th if they don't have any records of her going in and out of the gate of their complex. So at this point, phone records might be the best tool they have to close the gap. As far as the hantavirus, I'll be honest with you. When he said that, I was initially thinking, well, that has something to do with rodents, and I searched it very quickly. Um, that's pretty uncommon. Yet I was pretty surprised by the mortality rate. I didn't realize that mortality for that type of thing could be so high.
Well, high, but also you talk about the confirmed cases by that press conference. I mean, the notes that I have, confirmed cases are between 1 and 5 each year, but still you have that mortality rate at 42%. But as you were saying, they were both tested negative for COVID and carbon monoxide. Also, those pills that were found were just thyroid medication, which is something else that was pondered about whenever we first heard that detail in this particular case. But I'm curious. I mean, at this standpoint, from your expertise, is this still considered suspicious, or is this almost a closed case here?
Yeah, I believe we're very close to a closed case. If the medical examiner has done their work and they have concluded that there is no evidence of uh, trauma, something that they would have died at the hands of another person, and they are determining the cause of death to be natural, that is going to essentially close the book on the possibility of anything being criminal. And that is, for the most part, going to tie up the work that the sheriff is doing on this. They've done a lot more, and they've followed this to much more detail than the or a normal death investigation, and obviously because of the high profile of what's going on here. But I would imagine this is going to close it out. They may tie up some loose ends. They're going to include the information on cell records when they get it, but this is about it.
All right, Jared, thank you very much. Again, investigators there are saying that it appears that actor Gene Hackman was likely home for a week after his wife passed. They were asked, could he, in his advanced Alzheimer's state, live alone? That medical expert saying that he was in a poor state of health.